Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beyond Pain podcast with myself, Joe LaVacca, and Joe Gambino. In today's episode, Joe and I stay in the world of low back pain to discuss its most common form, and spoiler alert, it is not going to be what you think. So please enjoy this episode as we share lots of tips and ways to manage non-specific low back pain for those of you who are suffering from it. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode with someone else. It will really help the podcast grow. Without further ado, here is episode 14 on non-specific low back pain.
Welcome to the Beyond Pain podcast with your host, Joe Gambino and Joe LaVacca. Join the two Joes, two physical therapists, as they discuss how to navigate the uncertainties of pain so you can move beyond it and get back to the activities you love most. This podcast is for Joe, and their guests to share their clinical thoughts and ideas based on their collective clinical experiences. Can this information be for you? Maybe, but we cannot know for sure. Therefore, it is always worth talking to your healthcare provider to make the best decisions in your care before you implement anything on this podcast. And please use common sense. Welcome back into the Beyond Pain podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Gambino. You can find me on Instagram at Joe Gambino DPT. And Joe, if you're watching this on YouTube, Joe did an early wave because I have not introduced him yet.
But threw off the
Joe
cadence.
LaVacca, that's right. I'm here with the lovely Joe LaVacca. You can find him on Instagram at strengthinmotion_PT. We throw that out there. Just, yes, please give us a follow if you don't already, but we do love to connect with the audience. So please shoot us a DM. Even if you just DM us the word podcast, we're more than happy to take the conversation from there if that's easier for you. On that note, this podcast does have its own Instagram channel at Beyond Pain Podcast, right, John?
Correct.
Always
That's
correct. Perfect.
Yeah.
And this is live on YouTube as well. So if you want to check us out there as well, that is Cups of Joe _PT on YouTube. And I think that is everything. And there's an application form in the show notes as well. So if anyone is wants to talk to us deeper as far as what may be going on with them, or you rather, you can fill that out, and one of us will get back to you. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing good. It's nice to have you back, buddy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Running through that intro. I know you were away last week. Yeah, we had Dr. Michael Ray on. He was wonderful. So we'll be dropping that episode in a couple weeks. But yeah, the stress of the intro, because we were rolling there for a little bit. You were doing the intro, really, and even the outro. I was realizing as I was editing everything, and it was a lot of stress. I didn't want to mess it up. You had your flow, your rhythm. And then that's why I was like, because you had your flow, your rhythm, for those watching on YouTube, you'll notice that early wave because you changed it up. I didn't know you were going to change it up today. So I'm already on my toes, but I'm happy to have you back.
That's my goal, Joe. Keep on your toes. Keep you on your toes. What kind of coffee you drinking there today? What you got?
No, regular, just what I got, LaVacca.
LaVacca? You got some LaVacca coffee?
That was the real reason why I picked up the bag back in the day. I was like, LaVacca, close enough. And I honestly, just where I go grocery shopping, I like this kind of mild blend that they have, and it is always on sale for like $6.99, right? So I love it. Occasionally, I'll treat myself to some illy. Right, the nice coffee in the metal can. I do like a good illy, but it's hard to when you pick up one of those cans of illy and they're $16.99, and the LaVacca, which is just for me, is $6.99, and I'm like, I can't afford to just treat myself like that every week. I got to make it special. So, what about you? I see you're drinking one too.
If you're gonna spend $16.99, you need to find a good coffee shop near you, and if you like their coffee, get their beans.
Yes.
So we have a coffee shop here called Conway Grounds. We'll take you there, Joe, when you come visit in August.
Very good. Can't wait.
But they have good coffee. I've been buying my coffee beans from them. I'm dumping some espresso beans since I have the espresso machine, and so I have iced latte here for my
That's
my
right. I forgot you were
enjoyment
getting into
today.
the iced lattes. That's
Yeah,
right.
they're
That's
finally
right.
coming together. So I go between. I do. Right now it's either this or I do homemade cold brew. So those are the two things I drink almost every day now at this time. And the
No, I'm
occasional treat when
hoping
I'm out.
I'm hoping that the recipe is perfected over the next like 4 weeks.
For which one? Lattes or for
I mean,
cold brew?
whatever,
I
whatever.
mean,
I'm
the
just
cold brew has
excited to
been
come.
perfected for years.
Well, I'm just excited to come, see you
Yes.
and sample whatever coffee brews and espressos that you have for us as we, maybe do our first couple live together
That's right. You can do a
sessions.
coffee review live on this podcast.
Wow, that'll be an extra sode for the deep fans.
Yes. I mean, I can get a question here, Jill.
Throw it at me.
When you drink coffee, do you have a cutoff time for when you need to stop drinking coffee? Because it impacts
Uh,
sleep or something like that.
Great question. I personally haven't felt that coffee keeps me up at night, although I'd probably say the latest I tend to drink it is maybe like around a 4 o'clock cutoff. But that's also just because of my schedule most of the time. For instance, if I'm in the city, I might have like a quick minute or two to sneak out, run across the street around like that 3:30, 4 o'clock time to grab a cup of coffee and just kind of power me through the day. But if I don't, then I'm running up to Penn Station, right? And you've done this song and dance in the city, right? I got to get to the train by a certain period of time, or else I'm stuck waiting at Penn Station for 30 to 45 minutes. I don't want to do that. By the time I get home, well, I mean, it's just like 9:15. I'm usually making dinner at that time.
Mm.
So a cup of coffee then doesn't really seem to do it for me. Now, my parents drink coffee after dinner almost every night, and they don't seem to have any issue with it either, at least from what they tell me. So it does not seem to bother me. I know that may be individual from different people, it has some different effects, I guess, depending on your receptors. But what about you? Is this a specific, like, I can only have 2 lattes in the morning, or else I'm jittery, or what's going on over there in the Gambino household?
Yeah. So I only asked because right before we got on, I had made myself iced latte, and Jen dropped off Olivia at daycare, and we're out of iced coffee now. She finished it this morning, and she comes over. She's like, "Oh, I need another coffee. I'm the coffee maker of the house." And I was like, "Well, I literally just made one." So I was like, "Here you go." She's like, "No, I want a coffee made for you." I was like, "Listen." She is highly affected by caffeine. Like if she has the afternoon, like she won't sleep at night. So it's like I can drink one of these at like 10 o'clock at night and fall asleep like a baby afterwards.
Asleep, right?
Like there's nothing better for me when I go out for a nice dinner to get a cappuccino afterwards. That's like
Very
boom,
nice.
hits the spot every time. And I can go home, and I'll say there's probably a couple of occasions where it might have impacted the sleep where I sleep a little bit longer, but 95% of the time it does not. So I was like, here, take it. I can drink one of these later. And then I had time to make myself another one anyway. So it all worked out well.
That's perfect. I mean, and that's actually interesting because I'm thinking about my nights out, and I do agree with you, right? Like if I'm going out, I sometimes like to have an espresso martini first because I'm like, let's get the the energy flowing, right? A little shot of espresso. I know it doesn't work like this, but a little shot of espresso, a little martini. Hey, this is great because I don't want to be doing it later on. However, I think it just depends on the night. If I know we're going to be out late, Court and I or a few of my friends, like an espresso martini first, I think sets me in this mindset that it's going to be a late night. As opposed to if I was out at a nice restaurant, perhaps with yourself, I get some espresso. I'd love a little Zambuca in that espresso. I love just like a little flavor to the coffee, which I feel like will settle me down, whether that's a Jameson or like a Galliano or Amaretto, right? So there is something that's weird about me finishing a night, like a calm night, with a hot coffee and a Zambuca, Galliano, or Amaretto versus an espresso martini that gets me amped up for the night. That has to be psychological. I'm thinking right now.
I was just gonna say, I feel like now, like this is actually, and I know this isn't even really where our conversation was going today. But this is almost like, I mean, you think about pain now, right? Like we already know that it's so multifactorial, and your experience when pain happens and a whole lot of other factors and stress can all layer on top of it. And I think these are some of those things that start to tell us like how pain, right, is not just pain, right? It can be impacted by so many factors. It's something like how you respond to coffee. I mean, we've seen how many studies where like they've taken like white wine, put red dye in it, they give it to like sommeliers, and you can't tell the difference between it being white or red, right? Because your brain, right? I mean, the way it perceives information, right, is going to, it can almost play tricks on you. So I think that's interesting. I think it's nice. I figure something we can talk about maybe to start this bad boy off, even though we are going to be talking about low back pain, specifically non-specific back pain, where there's no real, you know, rationale for why you have it, and your eyes are clean and all that fun stuff. So I think these two things will blend together. So why don't we start there, and you can give your thoughts on that.
I love that transition because we talk about that a lot in the show. And I think even some guests have brought that up, that context matters. And I think this is so key. The same ingredients for me, espresso and alcohol, can either get me into a mindset of ramping up my night, or espresso and alcohol can get me into a mindset of ramping down my night and getting ready for bed. And it's probably really funny because it depends on who I'm with, what my expectations are. And that's a beautiful segue, Joe, because I think
Thank you.
pain
Thank
will
you.
obviously do the same thing to us, right? When you're having some pain with your training, are you anticipating an event on the weekend, right? Maybe there's a run or a marathon coming up. Maybe you have a lift coming up. So that back pain that you would normally get after your deadlifts, or that knee pain that you kind of occasionally get after you run, is just simply magnified, right? Or just given a whole different meaning because you have a different sort of connotation to look forward to. So yeah, that was a nice segue. I think we should make a coffee connection to pain in every episode if we could.
Oh, I mean, that was I mean, usually you gave me. I feel like it was you gave me the layup unintentional, right? Like that was it just hit me. I was like, wow, we're talking about perceptions, right, and how it changes things, and what can amp you up and what can calm you down. And I think it's very similar. And I have some clients that I'm working with now that they become fearful of movement over time because of how long they've had pain, right? And when we become fearful of things, and there's this whole, you're almost expecting to have pain when you do a movement, right? Like I feel like things like that will have like a good opportunity to increase that pain response for somebody. So definitely, I think it's a good point here. But let's dive into I think where this conversation should start for low back pain, because we're talking about non-specific. Because I guess like, what would you say? How would you define non-specific low back pain, and how would that compare to other diagnoses that might pop up? I know we talked about sciatica and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that would probably be the easiest or freshest in clients' minds or listeners' minds, because we did the sciatica episode last week. Non-specific back pain is not a fun definition, I think, for clients. I think especially as we start off a lot of assessments, most clients will tell me part of their goals is, I want to figure out what exactly is causing my pain, or what is the root cause of my pain. And as a clinician, sometimes I'm like, oh boy, they are not going to probably like what I tell them after this assessment, because they're already shining a light that this is probably going to be non-specific in nature. Now, let's clarify what non-specific means. Non-specific means that just from a clinical assessment, I cannot reliably pin down one specific structure that's causing your back pain. So I can't necessarily say it's a bulging disc versus a facet joint versus muscle versus tendon versus anything else anatomically that we want to name around the low back. So what I tell clients is that while I can't necessarily rule one thing in, the great thing about your assessment and your story is what we were able to rule out. So we talked about nerve root issues last week, with the sort of umbrella of sciatica kind of like attached to it. So we know that you don't have leg pain that's worse than back pain. We know that you don't have, let's say, loss of sensation, reflexes, strength. Being that we can pair that now with your mechanism, and I think I've given you the Beyonce definition. We just woke up like this sometimes, right? Yeah, it's one of my favorite, diagnoses to give people, the Beyonce coding. But that can also be a little frustrating. And I get that because people do want answers. So when you are explaining this, again, virtually, because I think maybe there's an advantage for some of us doing in person because you can maybe put your hands on people and you can do these tests and retests. And it might be just easier to form that bond, right, with someone that, hey, this is okay. And let me explain to you why it's okay. So maybe we can dive into that a little bit. How do you do that virtually with your clients to sort of ease them into this idea that non-specific back pain doesn't mean that we have to be non-specific in our treatments or, maybe even cause for concern?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. I mean, in a virtual environment, yeah, keeping my hands on them, but I can still test and retest movement. So part of the goal during an assessment is playing with some movement and seeing if we can make some sort of changes to things. The other thing, and I think you've kind of, part of it, right, is what can you rule out? I think that's a great way to kind of put it as far as, hey, we can rule out any sort of major issues that are required to go get MRIs or see other physicians or really have any sort of concern over things. And then those are things that I educate on and let them know. And then I shift them towards, because even in physical therapy, right, like our goal is not to give someone a medical diagnosis, where we give them a movement diagnosis. So then it's really are they presenting from a movement perspective? What things are irritating? What things make them feel better? Where's their mobility limitations? Do they have strength stability limitations? Active and passive range of motion differences, right? So now I can almost start to paint a picture like, hey, well, you have these issues going on from a movement perspective. These things are irritating. And now you can almost start to formulate a pathway back forward, especially if you've digged deeply into their goals. Here's what you want to accomplish. Here's what you look like today. These are the first stepping stones to start to move things down the line. We'll know very, very quickly if we're on the right track or wrong track because we should see some sort of change, right? Even if it's temporary, very, very quickly within the first couple of weeks. And if we're not seeing those changes, then we need to reevaluate. We need to change the plan. We need to move forward from here, whatever way, shape, or form. And then if really nothing is changing and this is just not acting in a way that we would suspect, then even if nothing popped up in our assessment that would tell me they need to go get this checked out, at that point I'm like, okay, well, maybe we really do need to get something checked out to just make sure that there's nothing that we're missing, and we rule out some of these other things that could potentially be impacting our plan of care, which is honestly doesn't happen too often, but it has happened, right?
Yeah. You remind me of a few things there, Joe, which I think are worth maybe revisiting. With all the tests and things that we do, and I know that I always highlight that you're virtual, and I mean, my dream would be to go all virtual as well, with honestly the strength of motion. I think the power of virtual appointments is wonderful, and maybe we can do a whole episode on that one day too. But I think from a standpoint of all the tests that I can offer someone, a straight leg raise test, a this test, a shear test, the SIJ tests, or the sacroiliac joint test, I should say, I learned a long time ago that the patient-specific test is probably the one that matters most. So, for instance, I had a client come in this week who was sort of, presenting like she might have some leg pain, wasn't quite sure of the mechanism, did some sort of weird, step back reach maneuver while she was running because she went to go kind of try to find, catch her glasses while they were falling. And, she was worried, obviously, about sciatica. She was worried about all these things that she had read about. But there was a lot of things in her sort of description that didn't match sciatica. And it was sort of this more pain in the hip, not necessarily down the leg. It was coming and going. And her main thing was, hey, for the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I haven't been able to bend forward or touch my toes. And I said, okay, great. That's what I think that we should focus on, because this girl also did yoga. and she was sort of just dabbling in running because her family had done it and she wanted to join the family bucket list. Her husband ran a marathon last year, her kids ran marathons the year before that. So now she's like, hey, I'm the only one that hasn't done it. And 2-3 weeks in, my glasses fall, I do this weird thing, right? So that's all we really focused on was I know her running coach. I know her running coach is excellent. She was already active. It seemed like she had a good supportive family who were all kind of like pushing each other. And maybe that can be a good thing or a bad thing eventually, but the way she was describing it was good. And all we did was focus on flexion or just getting her down to sort of touch her toes. And that's all we did was that test, retest, and then what do you know? By the end of the session, she was touching her toes. And she was just so thrilled to realize, hey, that there's a pathway here. And I think that PT diagnosis that you mentioned is maybe something that we should be giving clients, a little bit more of. And for clients listening, a PT diagnosis, would basically be, hey, my client comes in with an inability to touch her toes due to low back pain associated with weakness of the hip, poor this, poor that. But then that gives you and I a plan forward. And I don't really think I've really pushed a PT diagnosis on clients in a long time. So thank you for reminding me of that, because I've been so sort of interested in ruling big things out. But I do think that that's a nice plan forward for people to hear that. So I think that's a really good reminder. So good stuff there, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you. And I think I do think that right, a high importance of being able to rule those things out and educate, right? Because I think a lot of people find some of these potential diagnoses scary, right? When they believe this is going to happen because of whatever reason, right? They saw it on Google, another doctor told them that, whatever it may be. So I thought, well, great. I think that's a great thing. But I do think that, I've never really, it's not going to change my clinic care or how I'm going to help somebody if I was like, oh, this was, I don't know, a facet joint issue versus just like, I don't know, whatever else, right? Like, unless there's like something very, very clear, like nerve tissue versus anything else, or, how, like, if they have if for a shoulder, if we're talking about, right, I want to know if there's like a full on, like, really, really bad rotator cuff tear, right? And like, how can I look for signs of that? So I need to know if I can rule them out, because I know PT at that punchline, that could be the best outcome for them. Or with the knee, right? It's like meniscus tears do well, but do they have signs and symptoms of like a bucket handle tear, which we know won't quite respond to conservative care as well. So little things like that, right? Those are the things I really want to start to try to rule out, like you said, but I also want to, other than that, little nuances and structures are probably not going to change the way that I treat. It's going to be more of how they're presenting, and that's how I always try to educate it.
Right. And I think the scary thing is important for us to touch on, because scary doesn't mean dangerous, right? And you mentioned it earlier in the episode that a lot of the people who present to us with low back pain, and maybe most pain in general, a lot of their MRIs or X-rays are, let's use the word normal or sort of expected, because I think after the age of 20, 30, 40, we're going to see adaptations on X-rays and MRIs. And that's what people want to talk to me about. Oh, but this said this, and this said this, and this said this. And I understand that. But you've also been alive and moving and participating in activity or not, or doing just different things. Why would we expect the inside of our body, the skeleton tissue, the tendons, the this, that, to not look different, but we expect the outside of our body to look different, and we're okay with that, right? Because that just happens gradually over time. So look at a picture of yourself when you're 20, look at a picture of yourself when you're 30, when you're 40, when you're 50. You're like, wow, I look different. And that was gradual and expected. So when clients present with these MRIs and these X-rays, I kind of tell them that would basically be the same rules we want to apply to this picture. If we took a picture of your spine or your disc or anything we're trying to talk about every day for the 20, 30 years, you'd be like, oh, look at that. Look at that little thing. Oh, look at that. It's like a little gray hair, a little bump there. Oh, that's cool. Oh, wow, that happens so slowly. I can see how that maybe wouldn't be dangerous for me. And it's just sort of an adaptation. So as a reminder, those scans, they show us your anatomy, but they don't show us your pain. And that's another important thing for clients. And as we were saying too, all these structures refer so much to the similar patterns, like facets and discs and tendons and muscles. They all refer very similarly. So I think that, these like big takeaways for people to mitigate fear is important. And one of the first ways that I try to mitigate fear with people, and maybe we could put together some takeaways, is that this will get better on its own. Non-specific back pain, right, when we rule out all these other serious and sinister things, typically lasts about 6 to 8 weeks. Now, I know that's not wonderful news, but it's better than thinking that this is going to last potentially the rest of your life. The caveat or the back and forth of that is that recurrence is common for a lot of people, and we don't necessarily know why, but we do see that people who maintain activity levels, who have better active coping strategies versus passive, and maybe kind of prioritize relationships socially, they seem to do a little bit better. So why not focus on the fact that, hey, you're safe. We know this is scary. It doesn't need to be dangerous. But what can we do to keep you moving over the next 6 to 8 weeks and then keep all these positive attributes going forward? Would you say that those are decent takeaways? What would you add to those takeaways for your clients with back pain?
I think those are great takeaways. And maybe I'm going to question to you, Joe, and I'll let you kind of take it home here. If you had to give someone 3 tips, just general tips, lower back pain doesn't have to be anything specific. What were the 3 specific things that you would, if it was a client sitting in front of you, you tell them to do to reduce pain, feel better, build more confidence?
Yeah, well, first off, I probably tell them, hey, don't panic. Everything we found out today and everything in your story leads me to believe that you are going to be able to recover from this. And I say that rather confidently because I know I have so much data on my side. The other big thing is that I want you to stay moving. Now, initially, when you first get the back pain, and if people are listening who are maybe day 1 or day 2 of back pain, it is okay to rest. It's okay to just take it easy for a day or two. But then after that day or two, start just doing anything that feels good. So if bending forward feels good, do more bending forward throughout the day. If extending backwards feels good, do more of that. If you were a runner, but you can walk. If you were a walker, but now you can't walk, try to bike, try to swim, right? And just know that any sort of lateralization or substitution that we make will be temporary at best. The last one that I usually would tell them is just stay optimistic. Know that you will get better, like I know you will get better, and know that it won't be necessarily 100% linear. So I think we talked about the Toblerone of recovery, like it's kind of like up and down, up and down, up and down. You'll have a couple of good days. You'll have a bad day, quote unquote. It doesn't mean you're setting yourself back. You are moving forward. That day, if you were able to run the day before, might be a walk day. That day, if you were able to do a heavy deadlift the day before, might be arm day at the gym, right? So I think it's just remaining optimistic and accepting the day-to-day and where you're at.
I love that, Joe. The only thing I would add in here would be listen to your body. Because especially as you start to feel better, we know that even if you decide not to see PT, chances are things are going to start to feel better 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, 5 weeks in, so on and so forth. As you start to integrate yourself back into the activities, make sure you're just not doing too much too fast, because we do know that the tissues, right, and when they're injured, they're just not going to, or there's pain, they're just not going to be able to accept or tolerate as much stress as they did prior to it. So you may need to just proceed with some caution. So you want to keep doing the things that feel good, remove the things that feel bad, and then you want to slowly dose in those things that felt bad as you start to feel better, to make sure that you're just not firing anything up in the meantime. Because I feel like that's always, and I think I've talked about it multiple times in this podcast, but that's like that point where you start to feel better, where I feel like flare-ups tend to happen the most, because now people are starting to go explore movement more because they're feeling better, and then they do something too much and they have more pain, like, oh my goodness, I can't do this now. Really, it's not that you can't do it, you probably just took it a little too far. So I think that kind of like slow, steady build up back into the gym or back into running or back out onto the golf course or whatever it is that you're trying to do. That's really one thing out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes even when you do everything right, you're still going to get a flare just because, hey, that's just the course of this stuff. And then it goes back to, hey, don't panic, stay moving, remain optimistic.
That's right. I've been trying to, especially more, I would say this is positive down the last couple of years, is I try to give my clients like a test, a movement test. So if we're working on a specific goal, I asked somebody out, he has anterior shoulder pain. When we started, he couldn't even move his arm past like his side into extension without pain. And he couldn't reach across his body with pain. And pressing movements are the most painful things. It makes a whole lot of sense, right? So he was doing really good. Pain came down. He's getting back into pressing with no pain. He had a flare, just like you said. And it started like he got really nervous about it. He realized after about 4 or 5 days, it started to get significantly better again. So he's recovering. And then when we got on the call, we're looking at movement, and he has like 50 degrees of shoulder extension. Like, I'm like, listen, even though you have all this pain coming out, like the objective things, like the test that I gave you, these are the things that we're trying to improve so you can get back into press, right? You need shoulder extension and shoulder internal rotation to do push-ups and bench press and things like that. We're getting there. That's why you started to feel better. Flare-ups happen. How can we now let pain come back down? Now we have new tests that we're working on to continue to build up on. And whether pain goes up or pain goes down, these are the things that we want to see get better over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. And if those things are getting better, even if pain's staying roughly the same or is up and down, we're going to be in good shape because we're building up better capacity at that shoulder, and it's going to allow you to tolerate to do more and more. So just stay the course, and we're pretty good. He's in a good mind space because things start to come down pretty quickly. But if he was staying elevated in pain, I think we would have had a whole deeper conversation there.
Yeah, amen, man. Yeah, it's like Inception. You got to have that token to come back to, if you're dreaming or not. All right. So what's your token? Just keep coming back there.
That's it. All right, man. Well, I think this is great. I think there's a lot of key takeaways here. We brought in some really nice crossovers between coffee and pain.
Oh man, that's beautiful.
Which, yeah, right. I called you the philosopher, but I'm slowly coming.
The last couple weeks, man. The last couple weeks, you're coming for it.
Well, this espresso I'm drinking. But as always, Joe, I love you. Listeners, I love you, and if you stay and are listening to these words at the very end, extra love for you.